Batgirl is one of the most iconic characters to come out of DC Comics. Having initially debuted in 1961, the costume hero has a long history with the publisher, with various different girls and women donning the alias, surviving retcons, and even powering through life-altering traumas. At the end of the day, despite whether your favorite Batgirl is Barbara Gordon or Cassandra Cain or even Betty Kane, the character has earned a special spot in the hearts of millions of readers worldwide. So today we're taking a more in-depth look at this member of the Batfamily with our list of the top 10 Batgirl surprising facts. Starting us off in at number 10, Betty Kane. Batgirl's introduction in the comics was actually a strategic move made by DC. Entering into the Silver Age after getting some awful press from Frederick Wortham and his book The Seduction of the Innocent, DC needed to make their characters feel more family-friendly, and dispose of the accusations by Wortham that their story arcs contained homoerotic subtext. In other words, they had to make sure everyone knew that Batman and Robin weren't gay. This meant introducing a Batwoman, a love interest for Batman, and Batgirl, a love interest for Robin. Batgirl, whose alter ego was Betty Kane, first appeared as Batwoman's sidekick and niece in 1961's Batman issue 139. Her introduction led to the creation of the Batman family, a concept which has thankfully transformed out of its former situational comedy self and into something much more significant and serious. She would be abandoned when Julius Schwartz became the new editor for Batman in 1964, and felt that they were silly and inappropriate characters. Betty Kane would return to DC panels though in the post-crisis continuity as superhero Flamebird, later adopting the name Hawkfire in the New 52 as Kate Kane's cousin, aka Batwoman's cousin. In at number 9, Barbara Gordon's debut. Barbara Gordon would become the next Batgirl, but she wouldn't debut in the comics. Schwartz would be asked to come up with a brand new female character for the 60s Adam West Batman television show in order to pull in more female viewers. Now during a meeting, one of the show's producers, exec William Dozer, suggested that they should introduce a character related to an already established one, Commissioner James Gordon, and she would be his daughter, who would eventually become the new Batgirl. Carmine Infantino would introduce her for the first time in Detective Comics issue 359 in the story The $1 Million Debut of Batgirl back in 1967. And he would say of the character, I quote, "Bob Kane had a Batgirl for about 3 stories in the 50s, but she had nothing to do with the bat. She was like a pesky version of Robin. I knew we could do a lot better, so Julie and I came up with a real Batgirl, who was so popular she almost got her own TV show." Which is true, there was actually almost a spin-off starring Yvonne Craig who portrayed Barbara in the show. But that's a whole other fact for another list. And at number 8, Librarian. Barbara Gordon is often considered to have really repped the profession of librarian. Her initial civilian gig is a librarian at the Gotham City Library, which when looked at analytically allows her alter ego to be a pretty good analogy of the 60s women's rights movement, setting her apart from the other female characters that existed at the time in comics. Now she's been ranked by the British Film Institute as one of the top 10 best librarians on screen, and academics have written about her portrayal as a librarian as being significant to the profession, with Barbara representing it as a valuable and honorable career, despite the argument that being a librarian is just simply convenient for her superhero alias since it provides low visibility and constant access to information. Barbara would eventually give up her position as a librarian in order to take up the pursuit of our next number, and at 7, politician. Barbara decided that she could do a whole lot of good outside of her batsuit too. She was elected to the United States House of Representatives, becoming a congresswoman. In Detective Comics issue 424, volume 1, Barbara is elected as Gotham's congressional representative, a spot she would eventually lose in issue 488 in 1980, which eventually returned her to the position of Batgirl. In at number 6, Erasure. As far as Batgirl is concerned, the New 52 revamp of the universe did a whole lot, including returning Barbara's ability to walk. More on that later though. One of the other things that DC did that got a lot of heat though from fans was that it erased the history of the Batgirl mantle. Now for context, when the New 52 launched, all titles numbering were erased, beginning each issue at issue number 1, and only a few certain events in DC's universe were still considered canon, including the Killing Joke, which we are also going to talk about a little bit more later on too. This meant that some characters altogether were erased or parts of their history were, including Stephanie Brown and Cassandra Cain, who both wore the Batgirl mantle at one point in time. Many fans felt the move was sexist since all 4 male Robins survived the overhaul, whereas Stephanie and Cassandra just disappeared. The two would eventually return though, but not as Batgirl, as Spoiler and Orphan respectively. And at number 5, women in refrigerators. Back in 1999, writer Gail Simone, who we'll be talking about a bit more on this list coming up, it's all coming into one number friends, turned the industry's attention to the brutalization and mistreatment of female characters in comics with the website Women in Refrigerators, which was a reference to a 1994 story in Green Lantern, in which Kyle's love interest is murdered and stuffed into a refrigerator, all as a means to forward the hero's story. The website contained a massive list of every female character in comics who was injured, raped, killed, or depowered as a plot device, and sought to seek out why these plot devices were being used. Barbara Gordon was included on that list, specifically comparing Batgirl to Batman, with Simone highlighting how both were treated in terms of paralysis. I quote, "Both have their backs broken. Less than a year later, Batman was fine. Batgirl, now named Oracle, was in a wheelchair and remained so for many years." End quote. Batman had his back broken during a confrontation with Bane, and Batgirl had been paralyzed when the Joker broke into her home and she was shot in the spine. And it's implied that she was potentially abused in other ways too, with her given no opportunity to fight back. Now that occurred in The Killing Joke, and Alan Moore, who wrote it, has even retrospectively noted that he was displeased with how the story had turned out, in terms of violence to Barbara, specifically. In at number 4, Poison Ivy. Barbara has befriended many a DC superhero over the years, but perhaps one of her closest friendships with a villain / anti-hero of sorts now is one of her most fascinating. We're talking Pamela Isley, aka Poison Ivy. The supervillain and superhero were never really pals in the comics, but in the Batman animated series, the two were given a much closer connection. They had attended the same high school growing up, and they were still best friends. Now despite this, Barbara has to help Batman take Ivy down, saving the Cape Crusader from her mind control. And at number 3, ALYSIA YEOH. Speaking of Barbara's friends, the New 52 and writer Gail Simone made comic book history with the introduction of DC's first openly transgender character, ALYSIA YEOH, Barbara's best friend and roommate. Alyssa came out to Barbara early on in the series. The activist, painter, and aspiring chef soon became a big part of Barbara's life and acted as a confidant, and even got a happy ending of sorts, marrying her longtime romantic interest, Joe. The character was praised for being a positive representation of a trans woman, something that in many mainstream comics has always been problematic at best. And at number 2, she dated Superman. Sort of. Over the years, Barbara has been romantically acquainted with a handful of superheroes, most famously Dick Grayson after he took on the Nightwing persona. But perhaps the most fascinating pairing that she's been involved with is Clark Kent. Back when Barbara had decided to try out being a politician and move to DC, Batman decided to set up his good pal Superman with her, by suggesting Clark give her a ring. When Clark is in DC working on a story, he calls her up and the two go on a date, which of course unravels and they both throw on their costumes and kick some bad guy butt. Needless to say, the romantic excursion ended there, and they didn't bother trying to follow up with each other afterwards. And finally, in at number 1, the paralysis problem. Barbara Gordon's paralysis and time spent in a wheelchair should be no surprise to any comic book fan, but the saga that came along with it, including all of the controversy years after the event occurred in The Killing Joke, is kind of a big deal, and has a lot of surprises. Now, as we mentioned earlier, the Joker commits an act of brutality when he bursts into the home of Barbara Gordon, shoots her, damaging her spine, and seemingly sexually assaults her after she's been wounded, taking photos of her naked and bleeding so that he can show her father, Commissioner Gordon, who he also kidnaps during the same home invasion. For years, Barbara would suffer some significant trauma, but managed to continue to fight crime in a new way, from her wheelchair as Oracle, using technology to shut bad guys down and assist other costume vigilantes. During the New 52, all that changed. Barbara was given the ability to walk again in her solo series penned by Gail Simone. She had undergone experimental physiotherapy treatment in South Africa, a process that was based off of real-life cases of rehabilitation, but it didn't bode well with Oracle fans. Despite DC's good intentions, there was a huge backlash. Fans were outraged that the character, who was really only one of 2 characters in comics who fight crime from a wheelchair, the other one being Charles Xavier, no longer had her disability. As Oracle, she became a major inspiration, especially to readers who had disabilities of their own. She found a way to persist and fight crime despite the horrible tragedy that caused her paralysis. It also gave her a very personal reason to be fighting crime outside of being the Commissioner's daughter, which made a big impact on her character's development. It was important, and going back on that really upset a lot of fans. That wouldn't be the only controversy Batgirl would endure during the New 52. Many were outraged by a variant cover released during the publisher's Joker month back in 2015 that included the Joker wearing his iconic Killing Joke outfit, holding a distressed-looking Barbara captive. As you can imagine, it spawned a whole discussion about censorship versus glorifying abuse, and eventually, DC, at the request of the artist, pulled the cover and decided not to use it altogether. Alright, there we have it, friends. What else do you know about Batgirl? Give us a shout in those comments below. If you dug this video, spread the love, hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe to Top 10 Nerd for more facts videos just like this one. We also have a nifty little playlist just waiting for you to check it out, so be sure to give it a click. In the meantime though, thanks for watching. I'll catch you all in the next video.